Welcome to another episode of Vox Podcast. Previously on Vox Podcast, we had Mike Erie return, which makes this one a little weird because we actually recorded it prior to Mike's return.
That's right. That's why he's not on this one.
Yes.
Yes.
So just to give a little bit of a precursor, we are talking with our new friend Annie, and Annie is from Colorado, but resides in Scotland. And Bonnie, how did you meet Annie?
You know what? Actually, my friend and fellow Vox listener Jordan knows Annie, and
Thanks,
he said, "Yes, thank you, Jordan." Shout out to Jordan. Jordan also introduced us to Brad Jursak in our other episode.
Hey, Jordan.
So, Jordan's batting 1,000.
Yeah, Jordan, you're in the inside circle.
Yeah, he is. So, Annie, he introduced me to Annie as someone who could discuss Enneagram with us. And I was so excited because I've known a lot about Enneagram. When I started working at Radical Wellness, I learned more. Yeah. And it's really helped me in so many ways, not only understanding myself, but also relationships in my life. So that it just, I think between the two of us and even Erie too, became such a topic of conversations. We're like, hey, let's get her on. So Annie does a great job in this episode. We kind of do a drone shot of the thing, and talk big picture. But Annie does a really good job in paring things down and explaining things and sort of where it came from. Yeah. But let us know what other questions you have, because we'd love to have it on again. To talk about some of the stuff more deeply.
Yeah, Mike mentioned it on the last episode, how helpful it's been for him. Bonnie has been in it. I have been reluctant, but have recently taken the test and figured out my numbers. But am still fairly ignorant to the entire thing. And you'll hear that in here. Bonnie and Annie have a great conversation, and Annie is very articulate and very knowledgeable about the topic, so she makes it very engaging for an idiot like me to engage with it. But also, on top of that, I think that we learn a lot about... let me just say that I learned a lot about how to engage with my fellow human beings who are wired so dramatically different than I am, but are still made in the image of God. Which is weird. I think we sometimes get a little bit trapped in our idea of how I'm only speaking for myself, guys, but how we think about ourselves and how we think about the way that our brain processes information. And then we get super frustrated when other people's brains do not process or function the same way. So to me, that's one of the things that's been the most interesting about the Enneagram is a detailed way of understanding the way that other people are wired, and that there's at least 9 types of, or I guess 27
with the subtypes. And I love what she talks about too. Something that it's fascinating is this isn't the way that we're wired, are also part of the way that we've grown up. They're kind of our methods of survival, depending on things that happened to us growing up or the environment we grew up in. But we don't have to stay there. Yeah. So as a tool and a lens through spiritual direction of how we can use the Enneagram to sort of live out to borrow words from Sky from a different episode, this like higher calling that we have and commune with God in a different way. So I think that you guys will like it a lot, and I'm excited to hear what you guys think.
Yeah. So this is our conversation with Annie, and she is out in a cottage on a farm.
Yes, in Scotland.
Quarantined in Scotland, which just sounds magical, but that's where we are. That's where we're at. All right, cool guys. Peace.
Bye. Okay, so tell us what it's like in Scotland. Are people self-isolating? Do you guys have quarantines? Like, what's going on over there? What's the energy of Scotland?
Yes, the energy of Scotland is way more lax than I hear it is in the States. However, These are also all of the people who did not rebel and go create a new country when they were in a major religious crisis. So you can really sense that inheritance. Like over my time here, I've really noticed how like this is the sort of just like, it's okay, we'll make it through, just keep moving kind of culture. And so, yeah, that's sort of what it feels like right now. And it's funny. There are just like one of the main values is just to like stay calm.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Keep calm, carry on, you know,
kind of sounds
that whole
great.
thing.
You know what, when because you mentioned before we were recording, so people didn't hear this, but that you're recording from a Scottish farmhouse. And so visually I'm picturing that. And then with the stay calm vibe, everything, it's all coalescing perfectly.
Yeah. I feel like I should bring my quarantine family there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome to come. And actually, I've had a lot of my work canceled. And so somebody recently, I also teach yoga, and somebody in one of my classes who is a sheep farmer recently told me that I reminded him of a shepherd and asked me if I would like to participate in lambing. So for 2.5 weeks in April, I'm going to help deliver lambs.
That's amazing.
Oh my goodness.
And it's great because I'll make some money because I'm not going to make a lot of money in April at all. So happy to learn some
that is cool.
Tangible skills.
I love everything about
really
that
cool.
story. I was teaching yoga, and one of my like, what do you call them, students when they come in? Is that an accurate?
Yeah, I don't know. I teach at a CrossFit gym, so yogi feels a little too much for what's happening. When they come to my house, because I have a studio in my house, when they come to my house, I call them yogis.
Got it. There you go. Okay.
Like
you're matching the vibe.
Sheep farmer, doing yoga, going lambing.
Okay, so you
it's perfect.
You're a yoga teacher. You will be soon a lamb person. And
is that the official title?
That's the official title. And tell us
I would like to call myself a shepherdess.
I think that's really good. Okay, good. A shepherdess. Yeah. So a yoga teacher, a shepherdess. And tell us also about your Enneagram background.
Yes. So I would say of all of those things, Enneagram coaching and teaching is probably more primary.
You know what? We'll check back in with you after April because shepherdess might get bumped.
It's very true. So
we don't know.
So I trained as a teacher in the narrative tradition, the narrative Enneagram, in like 2014. Yeah, around 2014 to 16. So the narrative Enneagram really privileges people's, as a way of teaching and as a methodology, the narrative Enneagram really privileges people's stories and felt sense in their body as they tell those stories, working with patterns of type as they come up. So instead of just sort of intellectually understanding what's happening in type and in the personality, it's a way of really working with the personality as it's found within the narratives of people's lives and being really kind of particular about those. Instead of, it's sort of the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning. Okay. So deductive would be like, okay, I know the type, now I deduce what's happening in my life.
Got it.
But instead it's like, oh, I know my life and I think I resonate with this type. So as I sit and tell stories based on questions about this type, we'll collectively learn more about the type through interacting with these stories and looking at the patterns between the stories, which have both similarities and differences.
Oh, interesting. So that feels actually quite more holistic than an approach of saying like, this is sort of who I am. And so everything I'm doing naturally fits in with that description.
Yeah. Yes. That's why I really wanted to be trained in this tradition.
And what's the other type?
Enneagram theory.
Oh, sorry. What's the other type called? Just so because I don't even know. So you said you're in the narrative type. Is that what you called it?
Yeah, the narrative Enneagram, that's just a school. So there are other schools and they wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that, but that's right. But that's really what the narrative Enneagram has put forward as a way of engaging with Enneagram work. Okay. And I mean, to me, it just really lines up well with Enneagram theory, which is all about the 3 centers of intelligence, the head center, the heart center, and the gut center, or the body center. And so there's a lot of working with the head, with the heart, and with the relational space, as well as with what's happening actually in the felt sense of the body as we tell these stories. And so I really appreciate that. There's always, it's a way of, I get really tired of talking about the Enneagram in a particular way. And maybe you've encountered this way, but it's okay. It's a way of language learning. It's a way of learning the types, but it's like you continue to rehearse these same archetypes over and over amongst people, and continually say things like, oh, that's such a 4 thing. Oh, I'm such a 4, which I am, which is why I'm saying 4. And it reaches an end of its helpfulness. Once you've sort of learned the system and the language, then the question is sort of like, what do I do with that? If I know that, then what?
Then why is it helpful? Yeah.
Yeah. And so I really appreciate this way of learning the Enneagram, because every time I go to a narrative workshop or training, or when I work with someone one-on-one, I learn something new, because I'm not there to teach someone who they are. I know the Enneagram. But what that means is that I know about a pattern. And then seeing how the pattern interacts with someone's actual life is really fun, because it takes us to the edges of what's known. And then there's always the possibility that we don't have to just be a pattern. Like there's always meaningful deviations, and there's always these sort of intrusions and invitations from the outside. So anyway, that's really cool. I could talk about the tradition for a while, but I think like I would get really bored if I just went to like learn about any Enneagram types as concepts, or like as a system over and over, because there's only so much. I mean, there's a lot if you're going to study the 27 subtypes, but then at a point,
it still seems like at any given point you're going to reach an end where you say, okay, what do I do with this information? What do I do next? So for listeners that have very little exposure or knowledge about the Enneagram, can you give us just like a brief overview of maybe what it is, where it was started, and what it typically has been used for? I mean, it seems like there's been up until now, because I think people think it's a brand new thing, but I think it's actually just gotten popular. It's actually an ancient practice. So can you kind of give a little overview of that a bit?
Yeah. So I will say from the outset, I'm not a historian, and the origins of the Enneagram are really contested. And part of this is because much of Enneagram use from the start was oral. So I'll start and say that when I was learning the Enneagram more intensively, I was working at a Catholic Jesuit university. And the Jesuits, it's a Catholic order, were some of the first people to utilize the Enneagram in their spiritual formation practices. But when I told one of the priests that I was teaching the Enneagram, because I taught this class for students, and it was all about sort of utilizing the Enneagram to name how their fears and desires were affecting their educational experience. And it was really fun. And as I was telling him about it, his face fell.
Oh, interesting.
And I was like, whoa, what's going on? And he just was very confused, because in his practice, they didn't talk about the Enneagram. It wasn't a thing that you just went around saying like, oh yeah, I'm a type 6.
Right.
Because to say
it's
such
private,
a thing,
right?
Yeah, it would be really private. And so I say this to frame kind of what it is now versus where it came from. He didn't think it was like totally offensive, but it was confusing, because it's we are in new ways of utilizing this tool.
Yeah.
One of the reasons it was originally only an oral tradition, as far as I'm aware, is that they really didn't want it to get sort of sucked up into the humanities and the social sciences and made into sort of almost like a tool, like a Myers-Briggs or that kind of thing.
Yeah, like a personality test.
Scientifically validated. Yeah. Not that it not that that's not important, and not that people aren't doing some work in that right now. But anyway, so it started out in a more sort of esoteric tradition. You can find traces of it in a lot of ancient mystical Abrahamic traditions, as far as I know, and probably others. But I'm aware of it in sort of Kabbalah, which is the Jewish mystical tradition, Sufism, it's a Muslim tradition, and in sort of Christian contemplative ancient sort of things.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was used as sort of a set of spiritual archetypes, which at the time could have been connected to what were the 7 deadly sins, but there was a version of the 7 deadly sins that was 9. And so that's actually what we have is the 9, in a way, deadly sins.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
People are going to be like, well, I'm not going to repost that meme now because
Yeah.
I have like no clue. That's fascinating. Okay, continue.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and I mean, it's really about these systems that keep us, that both we are all endowed with a piece of God, a piece of who God is. We come into the world really connected to and bearing an image, if you will. I'll use my Christian language, but bearing an image of God.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's just sort of what our Enneagram type says or whatever, but it's like we are particularly endowed with ways of looking at the world. Things we're really connected to. Gifts. We're one body, many members, lots of different gifts, lots of different ways of being in the world, which are not just 9 or 27, but more than that. But if we put them in patterns, we have these sort of 9. And these 9 archetypes also represent 9 ways that we can sort of shut ourselves down from knowing, or we can both shut ourselves down and replace who God is with our own activity. Okay. So I'll give an example.
Okay.
For my type, for the type 4.
This is exciting because Tim and I are also 4s, so this will be helpful as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, you could talk about, there's lots of ways to talk about the Enneagram, but one way, and a way that I think is important to talk about in terms of like ancient uses of the tool, before we get forward into, the 70s, when we're getting all these psychological resources attached to the spiritual archetypes, which are also really helpful and important, but the holy ideas of the 9 types. Okay. For the type 4, the holy idea is called holy origin. And it's all about having the source of our self rooted in God. And that kind of knowledge, to know yourself as being so connected and so rooted in who God is to know both your oneness and also your uniqueness. Like this, if I am an expression of God, that gives me a kind of uniqueness that is unsurpassable. Now, if I don't believe that, but I have this longing for it, because that's built into me to notice and to see, then what do? I start to create a personality, a way of being in the world that constantly asserts my uniqueness while I've lost my sense that I truly am rooted and an expression of who God is. That God has uniquely expressed God's self in my creation. So I become a creator. I'm constantly manifesting, as it were, this need to create. And this is where it gets really interesting, because on the one hand, as a person, I know I've been given gifts in terms of creativity. I'm a writer. I'm a PhD student right now. I love to write. That's a real creative outlet for me. And many of my other 4 friends are creatives as well. But there's a difference between sort of an isolative creativity and a creativity that, like, if I don't create this thing, if I don't produce this thing, if I don't feel like, then I won't feel special, I won't be unique, this is what I must do. And I am rooted in my origin. And in knowing that, I'm freed up to express this without, so
like without a bunch of things attached to it.
Yeah. So there's a lot attached to it. And that is, so the ancient use of the tool was in these spiritual archetypes. And therefore you can see sort of these sins that get in the way. So for the type 4, it would be envy. Would be the type, the sin that's attached to the type 4. And think about how envy relates to that sense of I'm special, I'm unique. If I look around and I see other people that are special and unique, I could feel like that diminishes my specialness and my uniqueness.
Right. It's like a posture of scarcity.
And so I always have to be sort of, it's a scarcity. I always am kind of competing then. Sorry. I'm always competing then for this sense of specialness. Like, specialness couldn't be something we all have.
Yeah.
It's my holy origin.
Right. That's fascinating. So it sounds like what's fascinating about this to me is that it sounds like all of us are sort of, we have this double-edged sword. Like, we're born with these gifts, this way of viewing the world, and depending on what we do with it or our belief if we step into this holy idea, and each number has this, if we step into that, we're sort of set free from maybe a posture. Tell me if I'm saying this right, a posture or a sin that is going to weigh us down, turn us away from God, turn us away from the world, or we can step into our holy idea, which allows us to take these gifts and these things that we have, that we were born with, and use it for something beyond ourselves, something for good, and we don't have to have all this stuff attached to it.
Yes, except...
Okay, yeah.
It's so patterned in us.
And like, it's uniquely us, so like us, we're going to deal with something so different than a 7 is, just by nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so patterned in me to even try and, without, like, I fall asleep to the fact that my longing to be special, my longing to be unique, it's not like I'm thinking about that all the time.
Right. It's
like,
a part
maybe
of you.
some people are.
Yeah.
But like, sometimes it's just sort of, it's my activity or my relationships or it makes its way out in all these ways. And it's so normalized for me to act in these ways that I have to sort of wake up to them. Wake up to the many ways that I have gotten into these patterns of proving to myself, to other people, to God, that I'm beloved.
Right.
And that is where I think the next steps in the Enneagram become really interesting, because these are the spiritual archetypes, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But not everyone is having these conversations with, like, God as a part of them, right? The Enneagram could also just, people use it in therapy, people use it in all kinds of other non-religious settings. And so part of why that's possible is that in the 70s, this travels north, because this was the people who brought it up from South America, Ichazo, Naranjo. Naranjo gets to Berkeley and starts these practice groups, which are connected and end up becoming really connected in universities up there. But essentially they combine these spiritual archetypes with what's happening in psychology, in cognitive, emotional, sort of behavioral and body psychology. And they fill out what these personalities look like. So it's not just sort of this talk about our relationship with the divine. It's that the way that, being a 4, being an individualist, a creator, a creative, those sorts of things, the way that makes its way out into a personality system. And there are so many different ways of looking at it. You can look at it through fixations. All the 9 types have different fixations. All the 9 types have different defense systems. All the 9 types are working with different fears and desires. And so there are a multiplicity, really, of ways that you can talk about the 9 types, but all of them are about however you describe what reality is, and whatever features there are in your reality, right? So a Christian would describe what ultimate reality is like, different than an atheist, different than a Hindu, different, all of that. But what the Enneagram says is that it's these systems, these 9 systems, that keep us from being able to encounter reality as it actually is. Or it's these systems that become invitations. Our personalities create invitations and openings for us to experience what is real, what is really real. And that happens through experience and through contact with reality in new and different ways that our patterns sometimes don't let us see.
Right.
So this would be for anyone who's interested in sort of like philosophy. That's what I studied in undergrad. This could be, if you know Kant, Immanuel Kant, he has a basic question, or a basic sort of thing that he's working with that we've really inherited in the modern world, which is this idea of the phenomena and the noumena. And so essentially, we're always experiencing the phenomena. So what we know is, in a sense, because of what we've experienced. But what we've experienced doesn't necessarily tell us about the noumena or the essential or what is real. So he draws a big distinction between our experience of reality and what is really real.
That's actually right.
And so then the question becomes, and I think it's a really interesting question for all of us, and it's fascinating in working with the Enneagram. Can we know more about what is really real? Can we know, or is everything just self-contained by our own sort of personalities, understanding its projections onto the world?
Right.
And I think these are really important questions for religious people to ask, particularly for Christians to ask. And I think that in each of these types, there is a really distinct and different kind of vulnerability, because each type is trying to control the world in a particular way so that they feel safe or loved or worthy. And those are really the 3 different projects that you could split them up into.
Yeah.
And if the project of feeling safe or feeling loved or feeling worthy is what rules your whole life, it becomes self-encased in a way that it becomes hard to be vulnerable enough to experience reality as it is.
Yeah.
However, I'd say pandemics like these really reintroduce us to our own vulnerability.
Yeah. I would agree. Answer, I want to go back to that question you asked about the reality that we experience versus the actual reality. I'm a spiritual, I do this, and then I'm also a spiritual director, and we have done a lot of work, or I do a lot of work with my clients, but then also I've done a lot of reading about false self and true self. And I know Rohr talks a lot about it. He has a lot in his Immortal Diamond, but just in his book. But can we use that same sort? Are those similar words to what we're describing when we're talking about the reality we experience versus what's actually out there? Like, so when we talk about false self, true self, at least when I do it with my clients, talking about the false self is kind of like that, like what I think my limits are or who I am. And it's this sort of this baseline. It's become something that puts me down or can turn me away or whatever, versus the true self is like, is my higher door. It's my holy self. It's the thing that is actually true of me, that God actually says about me and who I am. So is that good language to put to those same types of things? Are we talking about the same thing there when we're talking about false self and true self versus like false reality and true reality? You know, what's the distinction, and are they kind of one and the same?
Yeah. I appreciate that language as well. I think that, in a way, they have to be somewhere together, right? So the invitation to the true self, as it were, or to the really real, happens in the midst of all these senses of limitations, or in the midst of these fears, in the midst of these fixations. There's always the invitation. So the false self is not entirely false in that it's there and it's really able to listen for these invitations. The false self, or the like lack of reality, is when you think that those invitations maybe don't exist, and that there's not a possibility that things could be any different than they are.
Oh, got it. So you're stuck in your limitations and unable to even conceive of a world.
Yeah. So I think a lot about, and when I work with coaching clients, I talk a lot about like our vulnerabilities and some of our limitations are really real. Right. And some of our limitations aren't, but we think they are. So actually we usually have this weird flip where like, we don't think we have agency. Yeah. We think I have to do this thing. If I don't do this thing, like the world will fall apart. If I don't do this thing, this person will hate me. Right. If I don't do this thing, like the community will kick me out, or whatever. If I don't say this right, or you know, and usually things like that are not actually limitations, but we act as if they are. But then there's other senses in which like we think we have agency to do things like earn people's love, or earn a sense of worth. Or we think we can secure ourselves. We think we can run enough sort of things through our brain to make ourselves totally secure. Well, once again, here we are, coronavirus. That's a false sense of agency. And so a lot of my work with people is trying to understand what it means to work on as a human, being truly human. And being truly human means being vulnerable in all kinds of ways we wouldn't want to be. And being powerful in ways that require responsibility, which we also don't always want. And that's tough. I mean, and I think it's really tough for Christian people who have apprenticed ourselves to someone who shows us what it means to be a human, and that person's life ends in death and resurrection. But also that's something we don't have experience with at this point. That's fascinating. So I think false self, true self, I like the language. But I think if we think our true self is totally unlimited, I think that's wrong. I think it's getting a sense of where the actual agency is and what is really real about being a human, and what am I really capable of? And how long does that capability last in a sense? Like, how sustainable is that capability?
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Can you go back into what you just said there? I think that is so true. Like when you said we model our lives off of somebody and who ends in like this gruesome death on the cross, right? And for sure there's resurrection. I don't know. I was just reading this morning. Have you read Glennon Doyle? Do you like Glennon Doyle?
I don't really know Glennon Doyle.
Okay. I was just reading her new book called Untamed, and I was reading it this morning, and one of the things she continually talks about, and she's talked about it in these other books, but the model of in life in general, but for sure as to what we're discussing here, of there's the pain, and then there's the waiting, and then there's the rising. And so I think that I love what you just said about how sometimes when we think, okay, I'm in my true self, like I'm limitless, and therefore there are no obstacles, there are no pain, there is no, right. It's like almost can in and of itself become its own limiting belief of like, if I just do this or I just do that, I'll be fine. And I'm not going to run into anything. But in terms of spiritual formation, like, so how you use the Enneagram and spiritual formation, because one of the things we always hear in church, maybe growing up in church or even in sermons or doctrine, it always comes back to the cross. Like, we're always saying that. So in terms of how we can apply that with knowing ourselves and Enneagram, how do you explain that in such a way that where the pain, the waiting, and the rising is part of that? I mean, that's part of being fully human, right? We really love to talk about the humanity of Jesus and like the miracles and the water to wine and the feeding 5,000. But you're right, when we get to, and like Jesus did this to the poor and Jesus helped these people. But when we get to the death, we sort of stop. We sort of save that as like, that's his thing. But when you just said that, it made me realize like, oh, we really can't count that out if we're called to model him. So can you touch on that? I just feel like you probably have some really good insight there on how you use and merge Enneagram and spiritual formation in that way.
Yeah, I think that this sense of the 9 types or the 27 types as ways that we maintain kind of control of our reality is really helpful in this way. So if the personality gives us this sense of self that we need to feel okay or beloved or worthy in the world, what the Enneagram maps out then is the patterns that we use to stay in control. And it's not to say there aren't beautiful things that happen in the midst of that. But what it represents then is a disordered understanding of where our worth and our belovedness and our security come from. Right. But the problem is that when we give up these systems that have always given us a sense of control, we really have to practice proper is a weird word to use here, but vulnerability and dependence. And that's easy to say when you have a belief and experiences of being held. Of knowing your own belovedness, of knowing your worth, of feeling secure. It's harder to really practice. And a lot of times these systems of defense that the 9 types describe really have grown up to protect a sweet little frightened child inside of each of us. I often refer to myself when I'm trying to be compassionate with how outrageously I need to control a situation, or I see myself controlling it. I often will refer to myself as sweet Annie, just like, oh, sweet Annie's really afraid right now.
Right, yeah.
And sweet little Annie has learned all these ways to control, but the problem is that, like, in so many of the problems or so many of the fears are about, am I beloved? Will I be held? And then if I figure out and determine that I will be held and I make that decision on my own, it actually cuts me off from relationship. And instead of asking in the midst of vulnerability, crying out to a person, to God, instead I get a self-contained answer, which also makes it unstable. It doesn't solve the problem. Right. The question of whether I'm beloved is inherently a relational question. Right. But the work then is to listen to any invitation that we feel we can listen to, and be discerning about that invitation to know our own belovedness or worth or security, to go down paths that are not marked out yet. The whole point is that I don't know if I am most of the day. I don't know if I'm really beloved. I don't know if I were to make a mistake on this podcast and say something outrageous, will I just be torn apart? Like,
Right.
if it's not like very good, will anyone invite me to do anything anywhere
Right.
anymore? Like, well, and these are not live questions.
Right.
Like, and so, but in order to get the answer to them, the thing to not do, not that I don't want to do well or speak well on a podcast, but that will never answer the question of my belovedness. Right. But I could keep doing everything I do, could still be like, everything else could be a chance to prove my worth in terms of like, oh yeah, I'm definitely beloved. I can tell because things are going really well in my life, and people are calling me, and and I'm getting emails and people are connecting me. That must be a good thing. That must mean I am. Well, actually,
it's
like,
never gonna
I could
answer
just,
it. Right.
Yeah, it just will never answer it.
Yeah. So the invitation, I think, that's fascinating, because the invitation, I think what we want the invitation is to continually satiate this need. But what you're saying is the actual invitation, and especially in our lives with Christ, is into full humanity, is to feel this like big breadth and depth of what it means for the pain and the waiting and the rising. And like, I just thought about the ancient concept of joy, like in Judaism and in ancient Judaism, when they talk about joy, like we often use joy interchangeable with happy, right? Like, oh, that was so joyful, and that brought me so much joy. But in an ancient context, it's actually so different. Joy is like this big, huge word that is supposed to encompass the pain and the good. It's like the suffering and the redemption. It's this thing that happens after we've walked, like you said, down this path that we actually don't know, that we've accepted this invitation, and we're going to be thrown things at the other end of it is where we find like actual joy. But we just aren't used to walking that path, right? Like, we're so used to the quick answer, the thing that satiates the need, and not this hard path in front of us that encompasses the whole thing, the fully human experience of it all.
Yeah. And I'll say unfortunately, is how a lot of people use the Enneagram, is as another quick fix. So, we in the Western world often equate sort of knowledge with having sort of solved a problem.
Yes.
So if I'm able to describe all of these things about myself, then surely I've solved the problem.
Yeah.
But actually, the question is whether or not I have all the language to talk about it or not. Mm-hmm. The question is still live in my body.
Yeah, that's good.
Am I beloved? Mm-hmm. And there is no, like, that's why the Enneagram is not, I mean, it can help and it can meet us in our religious tradition, but it's not a religious tool because it doesn't provide the hope. Mm-hmm. It doesn't tell, I mean, there's a lot of, you could have lots of different beliefs about what is reality and what you can expect from God, from the divine, from the universe, however you want to cash it out. But all the different ways you cash it out, you can expect different kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I love to use the Enneagram in communities of hope, because I actually just don't know what sustains Enneagram work. In its most sort of difficult version, which is that we get down into these basic questions and vulnerabilities that we're holding in our bodies. What sustains that continued work? What kind of hope does? And maybe that's why some people don't, that might be a reason that some people don't like it. But it's, yeah. I mean, well, also, if we want to talk about it as invitations, who's inviting us? Like, what's the, like, where are the invitations coming from?
Yeah.
And who are we responding to?
And who is it that we're responding to? And when you say, like, so this has so many impacts on such bigger levels, and we touched on it a little bit, but like, for example, I think we're so busy and we're so, like you said, some of these, limitations or sins are so deeply woven in us. I can go throughout my whole day and if I stop and look and I really take an inventory, I realize how calculated the things I do are to keep some of the big questions, to keep some of the vulnerabilities, to keep some of the pain at bay. Even though I'm a 4 and I also have the capacity to feel deeply, I like to do that on my own terms. So I'm not always going to, invite those things in. But I think that's true for most people, for most everybody. Like even if we're all born, like you said, innately with these different sets of ideas and views of the world, because sometimes the invitation, although ultimately may lead to redemption, it can be painful as well. We want to keep that at bay. So, in a time like this, where everything is uplifted, like our foundations are shaken, like the economy's tanking, we can't do stuff that we normally would do. Even we can't have connections like we normally would. A lot of those things we put in place to keep the questions, the vulnerability, the fear, the anger, the pain at bay, those are gone. So I think for some of us, we are experiencing these new feelings and we're like, where did that come from? And it's sort of always there anyway. But this type of emergency exposes those things. So what advice do you give? This is like a 2-part question, but like obviously we're all going to respond to something like this differently. What advice do you have to give people empathy to how people we live with, people who see the world differently than we do, are responding sometimes differently than we are? And do you have like any advice of just like even a 5-minute, 2-minute thing of like, hey, here's something you could do each day, even if it's just sit in your closet for 2 minutes quietly, to sort of be able to come in touch with those vulnerabilities and that fear and to welcome it in as a healing fire that ultimately will help us in the long run. That was a long question, Annie.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So first I'll say, yes, I will affirm, yes, we all encounter these things so differently. And the Enneagram does help us explore some of those sort of psychological, like major psychological differences. In fact, I just spoke with a friend today. She's an Enneagram type 6, and these tend to be types that their anxiety is really on the surface a lot of the time. They're often preparing for worst case scenarios, all those sorts of things. So today I was talking with this friend and she was like, I was born for this. She's like, and it's funny because you would think, and some 6s are probably freaking out, but in her case, she feels like, oh, well, finally, like everyone else's anxiety matches mine. Right. It's like, and another 6 friend actually was like, this is cathartic. Like the fact that we're in a worst case scenario is like, oh, my anxiety, everything, like all these things I've felt anxious about, they're real.
They're real. And my body and my brain know what to do here. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I thought was fascinating. And then, I go to a gym here and they're making decisions. Not everything's closed in the UK. So they're making all these decisions about like whether or not they close. And I don't do Enneagram work with people at my gym, but I would say a lot of people who I would characterize as type 7s are like frustrated that things are getting closed. Because 7s are like positive future thinkers, everything they can be. Not all 7s would respond this way, but many could just be like, hey, let's be like, come on, let's keep going as things are. Like, don't limit me. I hate the limitations of quarantine. Like, the only people who are sane here are the people who aren't quarantining. They're like living into their freedom kind of thing. Which again, not all 7s will respond that way. I know another 7 who does not think that way, but some of that is, which if you want to get deep into Enneagram theory, guys, go into the instinctual subtypes. But some of that has to do with whether or not you're a self-preservation, a 1-to-1, or a social subtype of your type. But yeah, so all that to say, you have these vastly different responses. Some people are really concerned with the way that this affects their first thought is like not just about them, but how it affects the most vulnerable in society. What is the right thing to do? You know, you could think about it through, like, you could tell the story of this crisis through the questions of each type.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
The ones could be asking, like, what's the right thing to do here? The 2s could be asking, how can I help? The 3s are asking, what's going to be the most successful way of dealing with this crisis? 4s are saying, how is everyone feeling? 5s are like, thank God I get to self-isolate. 6s are like, I've been preparing for this my whole lifetime. Who wants to see my, like, crisis plan, right?
Yeah, exactly.
7s are like, why are you trying to put all these limits and restrictions on me? 8s are like, how do we protect the most vulnerable in our society?
Yeah.
And 9s are like, how do we, like, have peaceful relationships in the midst of all this, right? So this is a really, that's very condensed. There are many other questions that the different types might be asking, but that's an interesting thing to notice. If you're just starting to get into the Enneagram, maybe notice what are the main kinds of questions you're asking, and what are the questions that you're really frustrated by.
Yeah.
Like, and then just be interested. You don't need to build a case about why. And that's what we tend to do in moments like this when there's a lot of tension, is build a case against, like, why my way of seeing things is right. Right. But you essentially, like,
we need all those questions right now.
We need all those questions, and some of their answers might be in conflict, but it doesn't mean that the origin of the question is bad. It's just that it may not be the best for everyone, but we need to think about how can we, you know, like, for instance, I said the thing about the 7s and the quarantining, and maybe quarantine is what actually needs to happen. But we really need those creative, free minds that think about freedom to think about how do we enjoy and get creative and feel a sense of freedom even within, you know, our 4 walls.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating.
Let me ask a couple of, like, basic questions if I can, just because I'm very new to all this stuff, and I'm tracking mostly with what you guys are saying, and I like it. I think it's very encouraging. I'm trying to, so just correct me if I'm wrong with some of the stuff, because some people have never taken the Enneagram, and they're like, all right, everyone's been telling me to do this. I'm going to go log on and I'm going to take the test. I'm going to find out my number. But kind of the hows and whys why this is helpful or that kind of stuff. So we mentioned Myers-Briggs, and there's been, you know, there's the color testing, and there's these different things that have been personality tests over the years. And I've heard that as like I'm not interested in taking another personality, whatever. But I remember, like, so in the early 2000s when, like, or maybe it was the late 90s, the resurgence of, like, the love languages came around.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like how often you try to love somebody. So, like, my wife and I are totally different love languages from what I remember from that time period. And learning through, like, marriage and stuff of not loving her the way that I expect to be loved, and learning how to love her correctly based on the way that she receives love and the way that she sees love, was like it seems very basic, but learning that I was like, oh, obviously she did, you know, this is how I receive this. And to her, it means it's kind of nonsense because she receives it this total way.
Right.
So in one sense, I see the Enneagram and understanding, and how you guys just framed, how everyone responds differently, and how all those are, how we do need all those responses, and how just different humans are from each other, and how great that is, and how it builds this wonderfully different painted community, you know, tapestry of different hearts and minds. I see that as a strength, right? Is that, am I getting that correctly? Like, even just understanding how different people are and how they interact and react to things. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So are you saying that each of the types can be seen as like a unique and beautiful and important expression?
Yeah, and knowing how to interact with those, like me being a 4, and then I forget what my wife is, and I don't know anything outside of like that. I'm a 4 or 5, I think.
Oh,
is
4
what
wing
my
5.
thing was. Yeah, like you was talking about, like great, I get an excuse to isolate, perfect.
Yeah, like you're saying, Tim, like building empathy for each other and understanding like, oh, she's inherently seeing the world this way.
Exactly. And I see that as such a constructive tool for coexisting on this planet with, 7 billion different people.
Yeah.
This is a great way of understanding what makes so-and-so tick, because they are ticking differently. They were created differently than I was. And then this idea that we're all created in the image of God, that means that we're all reflections of God, even in our differences, which is also fascinating. And the other thing I was thinking too is when you were talking about this reaction to the 7 deadly sins thing, I think that's really fascinating, or the 9 deadly sins, which is even more fascinating because I've never heard that before. Yeah. And with the 4s being envy, I remember, so Mike Erie, who is the host and the kind of founder of this podcast, he gave a sermon a long time ago, and he was going through, I think it was the 10 Commandments, and he was breaking it down that for every thou shalt not, there's a thou shalt. And I thought that was such a fascinating way of looking at it. And the last episode of this podcast, we just talked with somebody about, we were talking about hell and judgment, and how so many of us grew up seeking God out of a fear of torment, and how opposite that is from a message of love and inclusion and that kind of stuff. And I kind of, so you can tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but I see, when I look at like the 7 deadly sins, and this is breaking it down to very basic language. So we want to avoid envy. We want to avoid anger. We want to avoid lust. And it's for the reasons of, it's just framed in a very negative context.
Yeah.
But in understanding my Enneagram and understanding why envy is something that I might struggle with, it's more about understanding myself and leaning into the way that I am built, rather than focusing on what I should avoid. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm trying to process this in real time.
No, this is
love
really
it. This
helpful.
is great. Yeah.
This is really helpful, because this is exactly, I think a lot of times when people come into coaching work with me, they think we're going to sort of like figure out how to get out of envy, how to get out of anger, but actually it's always, there's, I use an image, and actually maybe this will go back to one of the questions you would ask, Bonnie, but I use this image sometimes because I'll sometimes do sort of like visualization stuff to help people understand this process. And often I'll have people visualize that they're in a room. They're in a room that feels safe, that feels like they know it. Sometimes they like create one, and sometimes it's a room that they know. And then they hear a knock at the door. And sometimes they don't know what the knock is at first, but sometimes we're working with a concept like anger or envy that they feel really familiar with.
Yeah.
And we have them imagine that this feeling is knocking at the door, and consciously invite it in so that they know I'm not envy, I'm not anger, but it's here. And it's here, and with it, it's bringing all kinds of things to tell me.
Yeah.
And so we consciously bring, for me, it would be consciously bring envy into the room and sort of interview, get to know, appreciate why it's here. For me, in appreciating envy, it's not always this way. Sometimes I'm surprised. Sometimes I'm surprised by the particularity of why envy is there. It's not just like, I don't know my belovedness. It's like, no, in this one relationship right now, I feel like I am this small. And so envy's here, and it's here all the time, even though I'm really struggling in this one relationship. And now it's just sort of getting really loud, and I'm starting to compare myself, and I'm competing with other people, even though I don't care about those other people or like that competition. It's just this one little place where I have really lost a sense of my belovedness, and I'm feeling grief. And when you start to listen to envy, then envy might introduce you to other voices like grief, like anxiety, like whatever. Because I can also get envious of people's money, because I have often not felt like I had enough.
Yeah.
And so then sort of like and then I'll tell these weirdo stories about like, if I was beloved, then I would have more money. God would have blessed me with this money.
Right.
If this was
Right.
It's like weird stuff that sort
you're
of
like, wait, I don't actually believe that. But
Yeah.
for whatever reason, that
But-
feels true.
Yeah. Yeah. But we avoid having to think about it because we get caught in the cycles of the envy and the behavior that the envy takes us to. So then if we slow it down, we take a pause, we listen to the envy. We don't try to banish the envy. This is this whole punishment mindset that we can often get caught up in Christian communities, like envy, sin, bad. And it's like, well, yeah, no, the envy is not good,
Right.
but it's good in the sense that it's showing us how distant we feel from this person or how much we lack a sense of being loved or whatever it could, we're really
Right.
talking about the fours a lot here today, but it could be with any other
Right.
fear or
Why
any
do I
other
feel
emotion.
this way about this, rather than just
Yeah.
being like, this person makes me feel jealous, so I'm just going to cut them out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and
I mean, there's
that's
so
the
many-
invitation, right? Like we could view it as this bad mentality versus a teaching.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm looking at all this through like a posturing
Yeah.
lens. if
Well,
that-
and Tim,
Yeah.
it's like how last week our guest Brad Jersak, when he talked about, or this week, I get confused about the weeks, but anyways, when we had Brad Jersak on, and he was talking about God's love, he's like, it is the love, but it's also the fire. Like it loves, but it also teaches. Same type of
Yeah.
thing, I think, is what you're saying here.
That's what I mean. I think that's what being a person in the world would have to teach you. Like that's what I think love has to teach us, that because it turns out that so many of the ways that we relate to people are ways of asserting our own worth, asserting our own belovedness, asserting security in the world. But when we really move to love, there's a real vulnerability there that can undo all of those patterns. But it is scary to do that. And it is always a question
Yeah.
because we don't live in a world where people can perfectly love us. So we have all these wounds,
Yeah.
really. And I think it's part of the reason that vulnerability, why loving people and loving people in a certain way, and then why it is so important, and then why abuse is so terrible, because it really, like right on the place where that relational vulnerability exists, it creates a wound. And it's the wound that we would have already been afraid of.
Yeah.
But then it just deepens it, makes it more real, gives us a body memory, gives us a history of having been wounded in the very place that we're made to relate and the very place we're made to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so how to be vulnerable on the site of a wound?
yeah.
I mean, and it's why we also have to be careful with our Enneagramming, I'll just say, and I'll caution, because what can happen is that people treat, you learn about the fears of each of these types and you learn about the patterns. And sometimes these patterns can be maddening in other people. You see them, when you start to see them, you're like, oh my gosh, get out. Like, stop acting that way. Stop it. This is bad for you. This is bad for us. This is bad for relationships. This is bad for our community. And that can be true. And that person has built up those defenses for any number of reasons that we don't necessarily know about. And it is always hard to come to vulnerability, to try something different, to accept and receive an invitation to our worth, our belovedness, our security, when none of those things are assured.
Yeah.
And I wrote a paper for my theology master's about this, like about how reconciling with God or with one another and Christian reconciliation is just like actually devastatingly difficult.
Yeah.
And requires a level of dependence that is really hard because we're not assured safety.
Yeah.
And so we have to be, that is just what it feels like to be a human in the world. And so like, and I think this is part of the reason that a wonderful doctrine of the Holy Spirit becomes important. Like that we don't force ourselves into vulnerability and into dependence. Like we also have to sort of ask for the strength and for the people and for the moments, because they're not in every moment. And Enneagramming could make us think that, like we could assume that, oh, Annie, like you are 4, you're always trying, you should know your own belovedness, stop comparing yourself. Well, actually, like not every moment is every moment in a sense is an invitation. And then in another sense, there are moments that are primed and resonating with invitation in a way that I don't control. And so that's sort of that. I wonder if that is maybe kind of part of the divine dance that Rohr would talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's so good. I love that. And I love the idea too of like when we're waking up, when you're talking about this, like what questions are sort of stirring in you or what questions frustrating you is something I like to do normally, but I'm doing it more during this time where some of these things are coming up, right? And some of the divine dance, like, because I have moments where I see an invitation there and I have moments where I don't. I like to remind myself that every single one of us is waking up a different person than we were yesterday and to a different world than we did yesterday and we went to bed with. And that I'm always just saying, like, I'm new at this. Like, I'm new at finding invitations. And I say to my son, like, my son will say, like, I'll yell at him or give him a punishment that was too harsh, like no Nintendo for 3 weeks or something ridiculous that didn't match the thing. And he'll say, like, why did you do that? That wasn't fair. And I'm always reminding him, and I'm like, this is actually my first time being a mom. I'm new here and I don't know what I'm doing. Just as you're a new kid and you don't know what you're doing. And so if like this starting point, we try to have the starting point in our house of like, I'm new here. I'm new to recognizing my envy. I'm new to recognizing, and it just, the starting point of grace, I think sometimes opens a bit of space for those invitations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And really these passions, as we call them in the Enneagram, or the sins of the type, or whatever you want to call them, are the point of so much suffering. And that's what compassion means, to suffer with. And so we have to do that with ourselves. So when sweet Annie is envious, I have to sit next to her and ask why that is, inquire about the envy, and not interrogate also. That's different. To inquire is different than to interrogate. And it's hard to both hold the fact that you really want something to be different and gone. Like, I just don't want to be envious. Like, I don't want to compare myself. But I can't force myself to not, because that's the like leaves on the tree.
Right.
There's a lot that's happening in the roots. And so, it's hard to be a human, but I love that. Just sort of, this is a new day. This is a new experience. This is a new invitation. And that's so important. And I think you have to be able to encounter yourself that way to do the Enneagram work, because the opposite would be to say, it's the same story. I'm always this way. There's no options for me. I'm always envious. I'm always comparing. This is my cross to bear. This is and it's like, well, that's a hyper identification that shuts you down from listening. Yeah. Sure. It's not that we're not these. It's not that we are these. Right. It's that in the middle of these, in a moment by moment, slow work kind of way, we get to slowly and gently push back the box that we've put ourselves into, right? Or we get to notice those new paths on the well-worn paths that we've been walking for so long.
No, I think it's fascinating. I have to teach at our church on Sunday, and it keeps getting, I was supposed to teach last weekend, but then the quarantine started. Yeah. So all of a sudden it got pushed back, and now I think I'm going to be teaching in an empty room online, which is weird. Yeah. But I we're going through Acts right now. And so I've just been having so many conversations with people about how the church was built, this idea of being built in community, in actual communities. These churches that met 3 or 4 times a week, and it wasn't about teaching because they didn't have a lot of that. Most people couldn't read, and so but this idea of just like building community, I'm a extreme introvert, and so when I think about myself, I'm like, oh yeah, of course, if I can be by myself, I will choose that. That's what I need. But then learning how much, just as a human being, we need community, and we need people around us, but understanding like how to actually have empathy for people, rather than just saying like, well, that's just how so and so is. And so doing that with yourself, but also doing it with other people. So I think, this is making me rethink a lot of stuff for Sunday, is what I'm saying.
Whoops.
Long story short, talking about community and that kind of stuff. Because I think it's just we're on this continual journey. Like when you just said that thing about waking up in the morning and being like, this is a new day and this is a new thing. And kind of seeing that stuff. I'm also looking at that through the lens of like, we're on this long journey as humanity from point A to whatever. And we're learning to do this together on this trail, all these different personalities, all these different colors and all this stuff. We're trying to figure out how to not just coexist, but to live fruitful with one another, right? Like not just tolerate, but like appreciate and empathize and invest intentionally and all that kind of stuff. And the conversation I think is, this is what I'm gleaning from it, or this is what the wheels are turning in my head on this, is how do we as a church first learn to empathize and love in an intentional way with people who are so different. And, obviously right now in America, with the current political landscape, that's becoming increasingly difficult.
Yeah. But you're right. Like, what if we said like, oh, that makes sense that you think that way, or that you vote that way, or that upset you, because that's how you view the world. Like, that's different than being like, I don't know what's wrong with you.
Exactly. So I don't know. Thank you for coming on. I think it's a fascinating conversation, and I got a lot in my brain right now.
I have real interest in doing Enneagram work with political work.
Oh yeah, I bet that's
because
fascinating.
I think empathy. So I think empathy and compassion have to be held together, and they're not the same thing. Yeah. So, I think of empathy as sort of like, I'm feeling things as you feel them. I'm trying to sort of understand what it is like to be you. Yeah. But compassion separates you, where you still you need the empathy. But you hold on to the empathy, and then you introduce another thing, which is your experience. And if I suffer with you, I suffer with you as me. And it's actually really important that we have those distinctions, because we both need to feel with, and we also then need to come alongside. Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. And make a turn, because if I'm listening in a coaching situation, and this is actually a big problem for me, I have such a sense of empathy and a sufferingness about me, which often fours have, that we get so pulled into the empathy that it's hard to actually like get outside to see that other things exist. And the truth is, there's a lot more that exists than that pain or that anxiety, but we need to honor the reality of it and the bigness of it. And then also, bring alongside
like
what else.
I think that's a very wise description and comparison of the two. Yeah.
Gosh. Thank you, Annie, so much. Seriously, I love this. Where can people find more of your work if they want to read stuff or read about you or schedule an appointment with you?
Yeah. So the best place probably is just my website, enneagramforwholeness.com. And then you can contact me through the website, or enneagramforwholeness@gmail.com. I have an Instagram. I'm not on it right now. I'm trying to use all my writing and creating energy for my PhD, but but I would love to hear from people, and I love to hear about ways people might find this useful in their lives, or where they get stuck with using it, because the Enneagram also doesn't give you within it it doesn't give you the tools for how to use it.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
So we really need one another, because so much of it is this like, is this my false self? Is this my true self?
Yeah.
Who am I? And it's nice to have the people around us that know us well.
Yeah.
To speak into it.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I so appreciate this. And this is like such a fuller picture of the Enneagram, and for me, and then also why it matters and how connected it is. Oh, if you could recommend one book for somebody to read while they're in quarantine.
Since you have time,
yeah, exactly.
I would recommend, there's a lot of different kinds of books, but I really like Beatrice Chestnut's The Complete Enneagram.
Okay.
And she's a narrative author, so there's stories throughout. She also, if you're a lit nerd, she also uses examples and archetypes from the Odyssey and
cool.
Yeah, and from Dante. So like the levels, are there 9 levels in Dante's Inferno? I think so.
Yeah.
So she uses those. Really cool, but it's also the 27 subtypes, so you can learn about the 3 different kinds of each type, which I think is really helpful. So if you're going to dive in, Beatrice Chestnut, coolest name ever.
Yeah.
Beatrice is Beatrice, and then chestnut like the nut. Also,
That's
your
cool.
listeners might be interested. I totally forgot about this, which I shouldn't forget. I'm starting a podcast, which will probably be out this fall.
Oh, how awesome.
Yeah. And it's called the Enneagram but that might change, but that's what we're working with right now. And the first season is about the Enneagram and religion.
Oh,
so
fun.
It's all about different people of different types, experiences of their own religion. And so, should be really fun and dynamic.
That's awesome. Okay, cool. Well, you know what? It's not out yet, right?
Nope.
Okay, so we'll have everyone follow you now. And
but
then when
if
it
they
comes
follow
out,
me on Instagram or on my website, they'll
let you know. And when it comes out, we'll do a plug for it too. So that's exciting.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And we're so grateful for you. This has been great.